Hello and welcome to the pond, the strange corner of YouTube, where we do reviews, analyze Disney villains, have deep dives, and also highlight cows. And I am your host, the Bullfrog, doing this while on the job. And I just finished Ron Conroy's Grant. I bet I'm saying his name wrong. This is an interesting take, and ever since I started the book, I wanted to talk about it. This is a book I need to do a review because the average American, I bet, won't recognize Grant as a president at the top of their head. I was one of them. But uniquely enough, he's one of the most important presidents of American history. Before he was president, he fought in the American Civil War. He was on the Union side. But how did he get there? And more uniquely, if you ever give a chance to do a show on Grant's life, like what Netflix did with Queen Elizabeth II with The Crown, it can never happen in modern America. Even though Grant's life would be perfect for a show. Absolutely perfect. Really? His school life could be a beautiful foreshadowing to his future in the Civil War, that these average students he meets and interacts with, he will be fighting against or allying himself with. Heck, one of America's greatest heroes of the Civil War was his friend, but later on in life became a rival. But Grant didn't know it. This sounds like an amazing show, but why would I say this will never come to be? Well, let's find out. And this is going to be the review of Grant. We're going through one source material, that is Ron Conroy, and this is an interesting book. And going through Ulysses S Grant's life through this viewpoint of Ron's, he highlights there's something very important about Ulysses' childhood, mainly a few things. One of the biggest highlights is him buying a horse. Why is this important? Well, it's how the horse was bought. When Ulysses was small, he's a big into horses and he wanted to get one for himself. And his dad gave him $25. Now the 20 was the price of the horse. Ulysses S Grant's dad said, look, here's the extra $5 in case you need to haggle. But this is the highest you're meant to go in haggling is $25. You got that? Okay. But when Grant went to buy the horse, he said, I have $20, but my dad gave me $25. So would this be enough for the horse? He got the horse for $25 when the beginning price was $20. Thank you. Why the author highlights this is that Grant does have a tendency to have a level of naivety to him. And this is one of the biggest things that plagues him as a president. And also kind of hinders him with some of his fellow generals when it came to the Civil War. Ouch. This is a very important character trait that haunts Ulysses S. Grant. And also it kind of also highlights he is terrible when it comes to the financial world and the business end of life. He is terrible at it. Because I'm an idiot. Happy? Another important aspect of his childhood is his dad. His dad isn't a powerful man, but he does his best to play the game, to make friends with the right people, and to realize, okay, work exercise here with this guy, and oh, I have a good business scheme. Let's do it right here. He is all over the place. Because of his dad playing the game and such, he managed to get his son into West Point. Now, West Point isn't an average school. This is a military school. And the only way to get into West Point is to be appointed by the governor of the state. And that's what his dad did. He maneuvered his way to get his son to West Point to begin a military career, because it seemed like that would be the best bet for Grant, because Ulysses didn't like working in the leather shop, and he doesn't have that business mind of him. So by the machinations of his dad, he goes to probably the most important place of his life, West Point School. If this was a show, the music would have to be interesting, because many of the students here he will meet later on in life during the Civil War. Some of these friends that he's making will be his enemies on the other side of the war, while some of these other friends will be his right-hand men, and some of them would be backstabbers later on. This is a weird spot in his life, an important one. And again, if this was a TV show, imagine how the music would play out. How would it be? Because one of the students that he was good friends with was Longstreet. Most of these characters, I'll go over their last names because their first names are hard to remember and their last names are just awesome. Longstreet, the right-hand man of Robert E. Lee, the man who was fighting for the Separatists. He was a school best friend. And also of weird, one of his friends in school, the famous General Sherman. They were buddies during West Point. And also in West Point, while he was making friends and such, he did make a big splash. Not in the sense of arithmetic or math, but with horses. Grant was considered amazing. There was the school standard, and then there was President Grant. Is this something important? Not really, but it's one of his biggest passions in life. Horse, smoking, and his wife. He didn't meet his wife in West Point, but one of his school buddies brought him over, and he found Jenny and fell in love with her. And Jenny proved to be one of the greatest defenders for Ulysses. Even though he has his three passions, he also has aspects about him that haunts him for the rest of his life. That poor business sense and that level of him being naive to human condition of backstabbing in politics and humans being complicated creatures, he was naive to. But another one that was horrible, that haunted him, was the biggest thing that his wife could protect him: his drunkenness. Grant wasn't like Homer Simpson going to the bar every day. No, he would have these spells. Like, he would go months on end without touching a drop, and then he would fall off the wagon and stumble. And he would have to get himself back up and continue on. His wife would be the greatest defender to protect him from alcohol. Well, his wife and one of his great friends, and I mean greatest of friends, Rawlins. I admit I forgot his first name, but Rawlins defended Sherman so much from alcoholism. And these were the only two people really protecting him from that vice. His wife still owned slaves. And when the Civil War happened, his wife was conflicted on what to do. Stand with her man and his principles and ideas, or stand with my family. She chose her man. And Ulysses had a weird take with slaves. In the book, it pointed out when he saw slaves that came over, he didn't help them. He said, I don't want to be messing up with you and the master, even though they're leaving. I'll just let you be. But when the masters came looking for these slaves, he'd go, I didn't see any slaves. I didn't see anyone. So he didn't report them back, he didn't defend them, but he never gave them up. But this was at the beginning of the Civil War. When the Civil War progresses, his mind and opinions changed and evolved. He went from that to suddenly, near the end of the Civil War, he is finding and training slaves to the point where he has a black regiment of freedmen. These are men that are going to fight against the masters. These are men armed and ready and fighting for freedom. And he did his best to protect these boys, not only from the South, but from the people who had issues with this idea. He fought for them. Talk about character growth. Again, this would be an interesting show to have, to see this character progression through Ulysses. And as this war progresses, you get to see him climb up the ranks and deal with the hardships of the Union, because he was a nobody. And these are some of the career veterans that have fought in the Mexican War. But one of the problems that the North had was all the seasoned and the best and the masterminds of the American-Mexican War all went to the South. The only thing that the North had was the ingenuity and the numbers and a few smart generals. But Lincoln was having a hard time with these generals. They weren't planners. They weren't thinking like the way Lincoln wanted them to think. It was leading to all these hard issues of what to do and how to fight. Things weren't going well for the North, trying to find a good leader to lead.
George, Seward is right. And so is Stanton about McClellan. He's mismanaged the best equipped force in Western history.
But Grant was succeeding. The Civil War had two theaters, the Eastern Theater and the Western Theater. That was where Grant was, the Western Theater at the beginning. The Eastern Theater was Robert E. Lee and Virginia, while Grant was on the other side. And through there, he won some battles and lost some battles, but his consistency of winning was better than anyone. And he was doing some strategic moves that were very impressive, to the point that Lincoln was going, I've had a lot of losers. I want to pick a winner, and this guy seems like to be a winner. And he chose him to be the next head of the Union armies. And he was proving to be good in the Eastern Theater. There were some problems, but then he started to find the right foot forward, and pretty soon everything started to steamroll and get better. To the point that Congress said, you know what? He seems a little perfect, and we need to rein in Lincoln a bit. So let's have him hold the military spot that George Washington had. And this is how Grant got to that position. Of course, this is the dumbed down version, but it's still amazing. And when he got to fill in this role, he got to interact more with Lincoln. And Lincoln gave him a lot more freedom, and he and Lincoln went from acquaintances to the very end, brothers. These two were that close. Their wives, however, hated each other. Jenny Grant and Mrs. and Mary Todd Lincoln, let's just say you don't want to leave them in the same room. Things wouldn't go well.
Woof.
But this whole video and the book isn't about the Civil War. It is 40% of the book. The other 40% is Ulysses S. Grant as president. That other 20%, 10% of that is him as a child, and the other 10% is him at the end of his presidency. His presidency itself, very weird, because Ulysses S. Grant had to deal with America at its worst. He fought in the Civil War. He was fighting against slavery, and he had his own arc with how to feel about that. But when he became president, it was during the Reconstruction of the South. He was absolutely for this. He was for the protecting of the freed men. He was for their education, their economy, and wanted them to become something amazing. He wanted to achieve that. But during this time period of the Enlightenment, it's also the time period and the birth of one of the darkest things of America. Yes, we had slavery, but this is also the birth of the KKK.
That's not good.
Ulysses S. Grant had to fight the KKK for his first term as a president. and his second term, he had to deal with this political force. He had to figure out how to interact with these people and yet not bend the presidency to be a dictatorship or to manipulate the army for him to lead to a dictatorship, or how to handle these political opponents locally without being a dictatorship. He had to fight these people, but in a unique way that he was very new to. This is a military man fighting a political war, and he needed a unanimous unit to think like him. But he didn't. He had to work with politicians, and these were people that had their own agendas, their own means. And this led to the weirdest conundrum about Ulysses S. Grant's presidency. It was filled with corruption. Was he corrupt? The book kind of lays that he was a naive idiot. He defended people he shouldn't have defended. He chose people that weren't good. Some of them were great people that were chosen for the job, and they were actually good with the job and understood how he worked. But at the same time, a lot of these friends that fought under Ulysses S. Grant and fought with him during the Civil War were willing to backstab and manipulate him. And the fact that he fought with them, he defended them when they were doing the dumbest things possible that made him look like a corrupt politician. And that is kind of the theme of Ulysses S. Grant as a president. His friends were his greatest enemies. And the one friend that could save him from all of this, Rawlins, died during the end or the middle of his first term as president. He lost the guy that could probably defend him from his friends. You're starting to see why I believe this can be an interesting show to do. To have that theme be a part of this man's life. But he had to deal with the worst part of American history. And I don't think anyone will be comfortable to film this or to show it. Because that would mean the ugliest side of America. The KKK. These rampant racists going around manipulating the vote, trying to prevent free men to vote the way they wanted to vote. This evil group did their best to manipulate and through fear and tactics to control the black vote of the South. This is an ugly side of America. It is there. And to learn about Ulysses S. Grant is to go into this, because it was 16 years of his life.
Woof.
And one of the people that defended him while he was president was Longstreet. Again, the right-hand man to Robert E. Lee. When his good friend, General Sherman, was a jerk. Not in the sense of he was like the other people, manipulating Grant and backstabbing him when he was president. Sherman was outside of the political world in the sense of Washington, D.C. But Sherman, being so far out, he could see the whole picture and kind of go, Grant, you're looking corrupt. But he never said this to Grant. He was saying this to the public. And he was kind of like a little annoying boy poking at Grant and how Grant was working things. This man who once was his friend during the Civil War was kind of like a rival to him, but never in front of his face. That is an interesting theme for Ulysses S. Grant. And throughout his entire life, he had that. And his presidency, wow. He made bad choices. He put his money on the wrong horse, you could say, with the many people he was bringing in. And the choices that he was doing as president were very weird. For his first term, he dedicated a lot in trying to get Haiti to be a part of America, to the point that it would be a state. Haiti. What the heck? Even though he wanted to do that, he did manage to achieve some talks and peace terms with England at the time because of the Civil War and some choices England did. And that kind of prolonged the war. He and some of his members of his staff, who were good choices, managed peace terms with England. I can see how, again, when you look at his life as a whole, how modern America wouldn't want to do this as a show. Well, it's not more than this would be the ugliest part of American history. It's also because of modern politics. Both Republican and Democrat would have issues with this idea of Ulysses S. Grant going more into his life, because he had opponents on both sides. And some of his opponents were his staunchest allies during the war. And one of the biggest heads, the Republican Party, ended up becoming his biggest enemy and rival. To the point, if Grant said yes, this guy would say no. It was weird. I would pay to see Grant's life as a show. The themes, the drama, and this would be an interesting period piece to see. This would be a war drama. This would be the struggles and themes of mankind and how man is complicated. And to add the sugar to this whole deal, he had a very interesting life after his presidency. For when he was done being a president of the United States, he did a world tour and he got to visit other countries. And from this, he kind of became an unofficial representative. And he got to experience other cultures and other peoples. And this kind of refined the mind of General Grant, that he wanted to go for a third term. He never got that. But if Grant had a third term, what would it be like? Because I know there's channels on YouTube that are going to history, and they like to focus on the alternate sides of history. What happened if Lincoln wasn't shot, or what happened if the Southern Reconstruction was achieved. There are channels that do this, and I don't think any of them have done what if Ulysses S. Grant ran a third term. If he did, how would America have changed? And this would be a man that's learned from his flaws of being a president for the 2 terms. He would become more understanding of American politicians and how their minds would work. We probably would have had a better president. We'll never know. But yet that is an interesting thought of him after the presidency. And also a weird part of him being after the presidency, he fell victim to one of the greatest evils that man has ever created, the Ponzi scheme.
Woof.
And this was worse than any other Ponzi scheme. Not only he and his family all invested into this and lost everything, this was Ulysses S. Grant involved in the Ponzi scheme. Not in the sense that he knew. The guy was naive, he was an idiot. But the people behind him who came up with this loan idea used the name Grant and his fame to get more people invested. They were making money off of him. So when it fell and broke apart, and this is during the time of the late 1800s, losing thousands of dollars. Near the end of his life, he was worth $18. His wife was worth $100. And this is a president of the United States. When he realized he was going to die soon because of cancer, he needed a way to help. It was said that he would have a year to live. How did he manage to save his family? People said, write the story of your life. It'll be the most interesting piece of literature. And he did. And that did lead to one more backstab when writing this book. And this backstab came from a man who fought under him.
No!
You're on the edge of your life. You're about to die. You're doing your best to try to save your family. And this happens again. This man is a tragedy. But it doesn't end tragic, because there was hope. Mark Twain, who fought on the other side, who repented, trying his best to do better for America and all that stuff, he kind of did a big brain game move. He did manipulate it so he would be the one giving Grant story publishing rights. He manipulated that he would do this. But in doing this, Grant did have a lot more money when these books would sell. And these books sold, astronomically so to the point that his family would never have to worry about money again. And he died knowing that. But the most interesting thing about Grant is the ending of his life. His wife knew what he wanted for a funeral. And the city of New York, where his coffin was paraded, she wanted Union soldiers and Separatist soldiers to carry his coffin. She made sure that Stonewall Jackson's crew, men who fought on the South, walked in marching step with regiments of the freed black men who fought with General Grant paraded alongside. So South and North were united as Grant was marched off. It is an amazing story. A flawed man with hardships and trying to unite a country at its darkest. But he achieved it. And I highly recommend to read this or listen to it. But be aware, if you want to listen to it, it is 48 hours long.
Damn!
And how would I rate this book? Well, from 1 out of 7, I give it a potential 7. The writing is good. You could stop, and when you start the book again and you are listening to it, it snowballs. You begin okay, then a few seconds or a few paragraphs, suddenly you're invested back into it. Ron is good at keeping that. The narrator gives each character their voice. So he kind of did a Jim Dale and trying to keep everyone as an identity of their own as he's reading this book. I bought the book so I can have it digital and physical. It's really good. And I called it a potential 7. Why? Opening night-itis. You saw it the first time and you go, it was amazing. See it a second time, you go, maybe it wasn't as much. But we wait an entire year. So next time when we review Grant and see if he is a 7, it'll be next year around this time. And we would see if Ron can maintain that. So I'm going to be listening to this way more than once and see if Ron deserves a 7 on how he presented the biography of Ulysses S. Grant. But until then, this is the Bullfrog signing out. I'm sorry for the wind, people. But I wanted to show off the land a bit. Well, not really the land. This is a backdrop, but it kept me in shade because it is hot.
Grants too. Hope you're not disappointed. I say to most people it's a washout. Now what do you see?
Me? Oh, I see. A small Ohio farm boy becoming a great soldier. I see thousands of marching men. I see General Lee with a broken heart surrendering. And I can see the beginning of a new nation, like Abraham Lincoln said. Things like that can only happen in a country like America. Excuse me.